We cannot take it anymore. Like when we see what happened with George Floyd in the United States, it's just the same cases but different techniques used in France. France itself is just fed up and they cannot take it anymore.
Bien malheureusement, la France est un pays qui vit beaucoup dans le déni, notamment dans le déni de ses problèmes relatifs au racisme.
On aime bien nous dire que non, le racisme existe qu'aux États-Unis, etc. Mais il est beaucoup plus pesant en France.
It's such a hot day, making sure that this Fenty Beauty stays on my face. My name is Hanna. I've lived here in Paris for the last 10 years, but I was born and raised in Sweden. My parents moved to Sweden from Eritrea because of the war that broke out with Ethiopia in the early 1950s and lasted for over 30 years. They ended up in Sweden due to the open migration policy at that time. After college, I moved to Paris because I was drawn to the French culture. However, I didn't realize that the culture included being silent about racism. When I watched the video of George Floyd's murder, I knew that the police brutality and racism wasn't just a problem in the US. It's a global issue, and they're very much rooted in France. In 2016, a 24-year-old black man named Adama Traoré died in police custody.
Ne sont pas rétablis par des fachos et des racistes.
After a lot of controversy around the autopsy report, it was discovered that the cause of Adama's death was the same as George Floyd's: asphyxiation. 1 week after George Floyd's death, on June 2nd, tens of thousands of French people came out to protest for George Floyd and Adama Traoré. The first protest ended, unfortunately, with uncalled police harassments and tear gas. 2 weeks after that, on June 13th, there was a second protest gathered at the city center, but the police were even more forceful. I went to Adama's memorial march held by his sister Asa. Adama died on July 19, 2016, on his 24th birthday. He would have been 28 today.
It's crazy. You guys can see all the people behind me here with signs, screaming out their frustration, asking for justice. Such an incredible vibe.
For justice, back back! For justice, back back! For justice, back back! For justice!
So what they're saying is no justice, no peace.
For justice, back back!
So it's very symbolic that we're starting this march just next to the police station where Adama was killed.
4 ans déjà qu'on est encore là. 4 ans de combat, 4 ans qu'on marche chaque année pour demander la vérité et la justice dans la mort de mon petit frère, dans la mort d'Adama Traoré. Là, on est devant la gendarmerie. Devant la gendarmerie, on a laissé mourir mon frère. Le jour de ses 24 ans, mon frère, il est mort, il avait sa chemise à fleurs, son bermuda, son bob. Il voulait juste faire un tour de vélo. Il voulait juste faire un tour de vélo.
She's not even asking for a minute of silence, she's asking a minute for a prayer.
صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم.
Asa Traoré's fight for justice has made her a worldwide symbol. She represents a decades-long battle against racism and police brutality in France. In 1983, from October to December, people marched against racism and for equality. In 2005, Zied and Bouna, 2 young boys, were electrocuted while running from fear of the police. Their deaths ignited the rising tension about police harassment in the poorer areas. After the protests, Nicolas Sarkozy imposed police crackdowns and stationed riot police in the suburbs. I headed over to talk to friends born and raised in France to discuss with them their feelings about the racism in the country.
I would say talking about racism in France had always been taboo.
Yeah,
it is. Like, what are you talking about? Why you are a victim?
Yeah.
Or blah, 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 blah.
Are you being paranoid?
Yeah. Being black, it's to be careful 10, 20, 50 times more than the norm. And
there was so many more police control in the suburbs than like if you went to any area in Paris or to a posh suburb, there was no police. My mom in a suburb where the majority of the population is black or brown, was controlled every single time she stepped out. And when I saw the images of George Floyd, I was afraid for her.
What I don't like in France, they like saying, oh, you know, in United States, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
There are guns.
Yeah, it's worse. So because it's worse in the US, there's nothing happening here. Actually, there's a lot happening here. Even though racism is more violent in the US, it's also more commonly discussed. Like it's out in the open. And also, I feel like that's why there's less, ordinary racism. It's out there, so people know not to behave in certain ways or say certain things to black people, which here is not the case because since it's not a topic that's out there, it's like racisme ordinaire is every day, every single, like it's all the time.
It's just normal to fight against racism. And don't be, oh no, black people, we're fed up. Be just happy to be here, stop complaining. No.
But yeah, you're always complaining, you're always acting as a victim, like you need to stop acting as a victim.
Be grateful. Yeah.
That's bullshit.
That's why I'm really proud of figures like Adama Traoré or Rokhaya Diallo, because it's their work every day to raise the voice and to see what's happened.
My friends mentioned Rokhaya Diallo, a journalist and activist in France who is a real force in speaking out about racism.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks.
She works at the French radio station RTL, where white journalists often interrupt, speak over her, and deny that racism exists.
So this is the radio station that you're working at, and you guys are talking about racism and police violence. So you're explaining your feelings and what you think about it. And then you have this white man who's like, no, what is this? You're totally wrong.
Once I started to speak, they just interrupted me. And that was shocking. I told him, you understand that you're interrupting the only black person around to speak about racism. And he was like, why are you bringing that point here? And I was like, because we're speaking about race. And as a black person on a French TV set, I think I'm supposed to be grateful. And they expect me to be happy to be here and not to,
not to criticize.
Yes, exactly. To say, oh, we're so glad to be here together. So not to speak about the others that didn't have the same opportunities as I did. And to speak about, issues that don't care about because they don't experience them. So bringing those topics there in a very protected space is kind of disruptive. And I think that's the reason why they are so aggressive, because they just don't want to hear about that.
Have you seen the difference on how the French media is reporting about police violence and injustice in France now after George Floyd? Have you seen a difference? Is it a shift?
There is a shift, but there is also much resistance. So we have been in denial for a very long time. So there is this idea of the French Republic being colorblind and being like the Republic of Enlightenment, so carrying values of, liberty, equality, fraternity. It's not the truth. It's something very beautiful in the ideal, but it's not something that we experience on a daily basis. So whenever you try to compare France and the US, people resist very hard. They push back very hard, saying, we're not the US and we don't have the same race issue. For sure, we're not the same country, but used to practice slavery and used to be a colonial state. French invaded all the continents, and they still have departments that are, the legacy of that colonial trope. What happened with George Floyd is that the conversation about race was so spread all over, so it was not possible to
not say anything.
To not say anything. So media resisted. They denied. They went against many of the things that were framed publicly, but they couldn't say that it didn't exist. So to me, there is a shift in the way that we are speaking about race now, and it's not possible to go back to what it was before George Floyd.
In France, the suburbs outside of Paris or banlieues are where police activity is most present. In 1945, after World War II, France invited people from Northern Africa and other formerly French colonies to take on the working-class jobs the increasingly white-collar French population didn't want anymore. But economic decline in the 60s and 70s fueled discontent towards the migrant population. The people once invited to work were no longer welcome and seen as a threat to jobs. The suburbs were built to house the migrants and effectively segregated the population. Today, they have become poverty traps where police surveillance is high.
Welcome to my city.
I asked my partner Dan to take me to the suburb he grew up in. So we took the train 45 minutes southeast of Paris and met up with his friends to talk about what it was like growing up there.
Here you can see a big picture of racism issues for black people in France. Two faces, black faces.
Mm-hmm.
They just remove the face. Yeah. So they do that twice. The artist had to come back and, do that again.
To repaint their faces?
And they remove again.
Oh, wow.
You see that, you're like, all right, so we a piece of shit. Là, c'est mes gavas, ils sont là. Ça dit quoi, les gars? Wesh, ça dit quoi, Miguel? La forme?
Vas-y, c'est toi, hein. C'est toi, gros.
Ouais, vas-y, bien vu. Bien vu, une petite place.
Ah, bien.
Qu'est-ce que ça fait, du coup, en tant que jeune homme noir, pour votre, je sais pas, mentalité de toujours voir que quand je sors de chez moi, je peux être en danger?
On a été conditionné comme ça, depuis petit, on est habitué à ça. Donc moi, je sors, je sais que je suis un homme noir, je sais que je suis plus susceptible d'être contrôlé qu'un blanc ou que quelqu'un qui vient d'un quartier plus huppé, mais pour moi, c'est normal. Comme je disais, je vais sur Paris, si on me contrôle moi, je vais trouver ça normal. Je vais dire, je vais pas être choqué, en fait. Je vais pas être surpris par le fait d'être contrôlé, en fait.
En fait, c'est triste à dire, mais c'est devenu normal pour nous, en fait.
Est-ce que vous avez vu une évolution par rapport à la violence policière entre 10 ans, 15 ans et aujourd'hui?
Elle a toujours existé, mais avant c'était caché.
Ouais.
Mais maintenant c'est au grand jour.
Ouais, c'est au grand jour.
Avant ils attendaient d'être dans les voitures pour taper les gens. Maintenant c'est dans la rue directement.
Devant tout le monde?
Devant tout le monde, ouais.
Mais je pense que à l'intérieur, il y a beaucoup de choses qui doivent changer. Hein. Et c'est même pas que la police, hein. C'est le gouvernement entier, hein, pour moi. Ça va, parce que moi je me rappelle Sarko quand il est arrivé. Ce qu'un chef d'État est capable de faire.
Et de dire surtout.
Et de dire. Donc je pense que même eux, ils sont responsables. Mais il faut qu'ils prennent leurs responsabilités. Et ça, est-ce qu'ils vont le faire un jour? Telle est la question. Telle est la question. Il y aura toujours des morts en attendant, des bavures, des ceci, des manifestations, des... Après voilà, faut juste être prêt, je pense.
From talking to Dan and his friends, I realized just how much living with police presence was part of their so-called normal life. Studies done have shown that young Black and Arab men are stopped 20 times more often than the rest of the population and are regularly subjected to the French equivalent of stop and frisk. My last stop was to see two musicians, Danny and Lydie, both born and raised in France. I wanted to talk to them about the song Danny wrote 5 years ago about police violence.
What has happened lately with the police violence and also with George Floyd, how has it been to create art since all that kind of blew up?
I think when you're an artist, you're a messenger. And this happened with George Floyd. I was like, let's not pretend that everything is fine. And let's not pretend that I'm inspired by what's happening because it's not true. Yeah. I'm this kind of person that just, lately was singing about love and failures. And I was like, where should I start if I wanted to write about this thing? Yeah.
I don't feel myself like an activist. I just feel like I have to speak about what I see around me. You cannot be an artist without talking about the reality of this society. Yes. I wrote a song called Police. I do like I'm talking to a policeman. I'm telling him why you do all this shit, because you can see it, that is shit. You're killing people, you're arresting wrong people. So what happened in your head, bro? Stop your shit, because it's too much. T'y as légèrement trop d'âme, et est-ce qu'il faudrait dire merci au secours? Y a de l'urgence ici, au secours, y a de l'urgence ici. Police, 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 police.
This has been such an adventure for me. I started this with thinking that I'm just going to meet some people on the ground to hear what they think about everything that's been going on in France since we learned about the George Floyd's death and the effect it had here in France. I have this image in my head that I keep playing is when we went to the March for Adama, and his mom, she was talking about her son and then how he died and that she's still waiting for answers. I don't know, it was just so emotional because I keep thinking about my mom having that speech, and just to live with the fact that your son is no longer here and you still don't have any answers and there's still no justice. He was just this body that was like left cold on the police station. Nobody cared about it. I cannot imagine having those images, knowing all this information, and you live in a country where they don't care about a case like that. And also speaking to Adama Traoré at the manifestation, that was really powerful to me because she is such an aspiring woman. Like, just standing next to her, you feel her energy, you feel her presence, you feel her determination, you feel her pain as well, but she just keeps fighting and she keeps going. I think what I will take away from it the most is that not being afraid of making noise. Like, your voice does count, even if you don't think it does. You have a lot of power. Even though the institutions might make you think that your life does not matter, it does. Your voice does matter, your actions as well.
4 months since George Floyd's murder, the courts in France have not set a trial for the police officers involved in Adama Traoré's death in 2014. The mural of Adama Traoré and George Floyd has been defaced. And still, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, has never said the name Adama Traoré. George Floyd's murder shined a bright light on the police brutality in this country. People in France are talking about it and coming out to protest. But the question is, when will it be recognized by the powerful institutions in France?
Police, police, au secours. Tu tires une drôle de tronche, tu tires aussi à vue, très rarement à blanc, le plus souvent sur des brins.